So welcome back to Courage, Dear Heart. This is Charli Ward here, and I'm joined today by Jonny Bowden. Hello, Jonny.
Hello, Charli.
How are you
Good to be
doing?
with you. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Excited to do this.
Good. Me too. You have been somebody I've wanted to get on my podcast for some time, as you know. Before we start, I ask everybody, because my podcast is called Courage, Dear Heart, what does courage mean for you? What does the word courage mean? What does courage mean?
Oh, good question. I wasn't expecting that one. So the biggest thing that jumps out to me is I see courage as a verb being a doing word. So a lot of people treat courage as a noun, as a thing. Courage to me is something that I don't anticipate or expect that I will have. It's something that I usually find I get when I've done the thing I need to do. So yeah, courage is a result, not a requirement. What is it a result of? It is a result of doing the right thing, whatever that might be.
Do you have any examples of that in your own life?
Oh, blimey. Yeah, like I'd say every day if I'm doing it properly. So it could be anything from having a challenging conversation with a client to, a personal situation, something with my partner or a family member, or even just life things. Like a week or so back, I was away, ended up in hospital, wasn't expecting it. Again, it wasn't like a life-threatening situation, but it was unexpected and it wasn't necessarily pleasant and involved being poked and prodded and a load of things. So yeah, courage, I think, doesn't have to be kind of big, lights and sounds, grand gestures and stuff like that. It can be big things, but it can also be just in the kind of little everyday occurrences of life. I think most people, if they were to look at it, would find that they had umpteen opportunities every day to do courage. Yeah, the more you take them, the better it gets.
Okay, so thank you for that brilliant answer. Now, most people won't know who you are.
That's probably a good thing.
So, would you like to tell whoever's listening a little bit about you? What do you do?
Oh, well, so we can get down to the really juicy stuff. I'll give the kind of shorter version. So my background is in law, my kind of formal education and training. Spent most of my kind of adult working life, if you want to call it that, sort of proper job stuff, in the insurance industry. I've been into what you could call personal growth, personal development for like literally as long as I can remember. I remember being around a friend's house at about 14 or 15 and picking up a book off his parents' bookshelves and his dad saying, "Oh, do you want to take that home?" And I took it and read it. So there began the journey. I mean, in more recent times, I coach, I train, I consult. Yeah, coaching and consulting is probably the best sort of short label for most people in terms of what I do work-wise now. Now, you and I have sort of wandered some of the same paths and avenues over the last few years. That's how we connected.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that kind of brings us pretty much up to date. I was going to say I now do coaching and consulting full time. I figure if I'm doing it right, it's not quite full time, but yeah, a bit more free time. But that's me.
Well, you are my coach as well. So for everyone who's listening who doesn't know, and I always talk about the fact that I have a coach, I believe in it, and I love doing it. I'm passionate about it. And you have been a wonderful teacher and coach for me. So for those who don't know this, you are my coach. And one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on is because a lot of the work that we have done, obviously I met you through the Three Principles world, and many of my podcast guests have been speaking through and from that lens. And much of what you have taught me has kind of been a level deeper, really, when you've talked to me about the energetics. So that people get a sense of what that might mean, can you articulate what the energetics mean for you?
Oh, start with an easy one, why don't we?
Well, let's get cracking.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you a kind of short overview, and then I'll let you kind of unpick it and ask questions, because literally I could talk for hours about this.
Yeah, I know.
Days, and this is a podcast, and I want to kind of give the audience something that's going to be kind of manageable and digestible in this environment. So if I had to sum it up, I would say we are all human beings. We are all alive. We are all here. We are all aware of the fact that we're alive. And inside of this little kind of meat case that you go around in, this little bodysuit, you are having an experience. There's all sorts of ways you can describe that experience. You could talk about your thoughts. You could talk about your feelings. You could talk about your behavior. You could talk about 101 different things. You could talk about, identity labels. I am this, I am that, I am a parent, I am a sibling, I am a child, I am an employee, I am a business owner, 101 different labels. But all of it is kind of summed up or encapsulated by the experience you're having in any given moment. And the energetics, or this thing that we sometimes call the energetics, is literally just a word for the actual experience that you're actually having in any given moment, in every moment, including this one and this one. And if we were to go on, where I would, I guess, go on from there would be to sort of talk about, I don't know, some of the nuances, or it isn't, the interesting thing with this one isn't so much sort of what it is on a baseline level. The energetics is just your experience and your understanding of your own experience, sort of how it works, how it doesn't work, why it's interesting or why it's important. To the extent that you understand yourself and the world that you live in, particularly, especially as it pertains to, your own emotional world, your own spiritual world, the world of your own experience, like literally what's going on for you every moment. The more that you understand that, the more that you kind of get to grips with that, the more that you are going to be able to have and do and be more of whatever you want to have and do and be in the world. To the extent you don't understand that, to the extent you're not connected to that, to the extent you think you understand that, but actually your understanding and what's actually going on is kind of misaligned, you're probably going to struggle or suffer or have a hard time, or not have as much of what you want as you want, and have more of what you don't want than you'd like, and stuff like that, and probably just generally have not quite as good a time of things. So yeah, short answer, or shorter version of the longer answer, the energetics are just a way of describing the experience we're all having, this thing called life. Why is it important? Again, if you understand it, you've got a much better chance of having a much better experience.
So your background and how you and I met was through the 3 principles, which basically points to the inside out nature of life. I spend much of my time trying to explain that, and we still believe that that's true. So
Absolutely.
for you, I know you had, you saw a lot around the principles for yourself in your own life. What had you get drawn into or attracted by learning about the energetics?
Well, so I've never been someone who's ever thought I was necessarily going to kind of end up anywhere. So I've never been a kind of an adherent to like this particular school of thought. I've never been a card carrying member of any discipline or group or church or whatever else. So my kind of MO with all of this is just, I just sort of bump through life, and I come across stuff, and I'll listen to anyone, I'll look at anything, I'll kind of let it roll around, either it makes sense or it doesn't, keep what seems useful, let go of the rest. So yeah, you and I met through, what a lot of people know as the 3 principles world. It's a really cool understanding. There's a lot of good stuff there. And I certainly found, and again, both people I work with, people I talk to, people I observe and see. For a lot of people, they still seem to come away from that understanding with questions, things that it isn't that, what they find there, this is good and that's bad. No, it's all cool. But I'm always looking for a more complete explanation, or a more refined explanation. So sometimes it'll be kind of filling in gaps. I had this question about this, and then something comes along and it just kind of adds to or rounds out my perspective. Sometimes it will be, a kind of process of streamlining. So I sort of work on the basis that there's got to only be one way that it works. There's going to be different people who have different ways of talking about it or explaining it. So if some of the words we use today, anyone listening would use a different word, that's absolutely fine. And I think throughout history, people have talked about kind of the truth behind life in an awful lot of different ways. So, I've come to be here today through having followed the path I have. You, Charli, have followed the path you have. Everyone listening will have sort of followed their own path and had their own context to this point in time. But yeah, what I see in this understanding, or what I found, is a more complete and rounded explanation. It isn't that anything, we're not necessarily going to be saying bad things about, or certainly not any particular group, certainly not the three principles world. But yeah, I found that I came away from that with a few sort of gaps and questions that some of the stuff that I've looked at more recently is kind of rounded out, filled in, however you want to put it.
Yeah, so that was certainly my experience. The principles were transformational for me in seeing through my anxiety and PTSD. And then there was sort of glitches showing up, shall we say, where the anxiety did come back periodically, and there were for want of a better word, triggers that were happening. And that's when you started to talk to me about this. Now, if we kind of go into it a little bit deeper, we could separate the energetics into masculine and feminine. Now, in terms of popular psychology, people would hear the words masculine and feminine, but that's not kind of what we're talking about here, is it?
No, not exactly. So in the sense that, you and I might use those words, what we're talking about is two kind of energetic frequencies. So, you could think of it like, if you get a magnet, you've got like the north and south pole, sort of two ends of a spectrum, or, you might talk about the two, the sort of positive and negative terminals on a battery. Again, it's sort of two aspects of the same thing that together form the whole. And yeah, when we talk about masculine and feminine energy, these are two energies that exist within the field of every single human being. So if we were to talk about the feminine, I have feminine energy within me every bit as much as you have masculine. So yeah, first thing, I guess, please don't hear sort of masculine and feminine as sort of male and female or man woman. Yeah, I mean, there are some more sort of subtleties down the road, but yeah, on a really basic level, yeah, let's not have anyone getting hooked up on that one.
No, and I think it's important because there's so many teachers out there teaching about masculine and feminine, and people saying, oh, I'm too much in my masculine. I work too hard, or I'm goal orientated. But again, this is very different to that. And the reason, what I want to go into a bit more is many of the issues I personally have had, and what's helped me in this understanding that you've helped me see. And it's a felt sense for me, but what I see out there in the world with many of my clients is this difficult relationship with money, difficult relationship with themselves with regards to addictions, and that might look like eating or drinking or smoking or under eating. There appears to be a lot of people that come my way who might be struggling with secrecy. So what I would love for you to do is kind of, if you can, just speak to, like, what is, if someone in their energetic field is, say, in their feminine, but not aligned with their kind of higher self, what would be, how would they know, like, what would the symptoms be for them? And obviously we're being generic, but
No, sure. I mean, you've given some sort of useful kind of context or examples there. We can kind of work with them. Before I do, you actually said something that I think is really important, and yeah, maybe just sort of bears flagging up before we do go on. So a minute ago, you said something about felt sense. So what I really encourage anyone listening to this or watching it, if you're lucky enough to have the video, to just bear in mind is, like, we're using words to try and kind of convey these ideas, but you will get absolutely nothing from this if you get hooked up on the meaning of words and, like, what does this word mean? So yes, we're using words and we're trying to kind of offer signposts, things that we think might be interesting or useful to look at or think about. But more than that, I would say get a sense of my being, Charli's being, the energy of this conversation. Other words for that would be things like, more kind of colloquial terms of things like tone or vibe. Like, everyone's had this, like, you've been walking down the street and there's someone on the other side and you just kind of get like a creeped out feeling, that you can't, even if you tried, even if someone paid you £1 million, you couldn't put into words. You don't know, going, oh, I don't know, just something felt a bit off. Or you've been in a situation, in business, there's a deal on the table, it just doesn't feel right. You're dating someone, you might, you go out with someone one day, you get a bad feeling about them, or just an icky feeling, or just a kind of incompatible feeling, and then someone else, it just clicks, or it just feels right. So as well as, obviously listen to what we're saying, but while you do that, listen for a feeling, listen for a vibe. Again, this literally doesn't make sense in English, but does what Charli and I are talking about here, does it feel true and feel on, like, the deepest possible level? I'm not talking about, like, does my intellect agree and does this make sense and do I understand conceptually? I'm talking about a kind of a facet of communication that goes beyond, words and intellect. We're talking about something deep here. We're kind of going to the soul level, I believe. To your question, Charli, so how would somebody know if they were sort of on or off or in it or out of it or whatever? How would someone know, sort of, how would someone navigate? Was that what you were kind of asking?
I think what I'm asking is, it's more along the lines of, these are problems that I see playing out more and more and more. And even in the sort of principles field, and me, myself included, experienced a fear around money. So if someone is listening and they are getting that kind of, yeah, this feels interesting for me, how would you articulate certain misalignments?
Right. Yeah. Cool. No, that's helpful. Thank you. So, but no, it's cool. So the first thing I'd say is all of the things, the specific things that you kind of mentioned or listed. So from what I remember, you talked about money, you talked about addictions, eating, drinking, smoking, stuff like that. And you also mentioned, like, a sort of secrecy component. So I'm going to, like, pick up the secrecy bit and just put it over here for a second. I'll come back to that in a minute. But what I would say is all of those kind of external problems, issues, challenges, struggles, they are results, not causes. They are results, not causes. So yes, it's good to notice them. It's good to be aware of them. It's good to pay attention to them. It's good to be open and honest about them rather than being in denial about them. Absolutely, as a starting point, it's really, really important. Where a lot of people struggle, and maybe this is something that the ladies in your community will be able to relate to, but a lot of people, will, over the course of a lifetime, will almost go from like one thing to the next. So they might have challenges of weight, and then they get on top of that, but then they start smoking, and then they give up smoking, and then they drink too much. So we sort of, I call it lily padding. So sort of jumping across the pond from one lily pad to another, from one sort of external symptom. And again, the reason that can happen is because these things are all symptoms. They're all things that happen because of what's going on beneath the surface. Now, because people don't know that, they'll either hit up against one particular thing, one particular kind of manifestation, and they won't be able to get past it, or they'll do that thing of hopping from one to the next, and they'll get stuck, never get past it, and they'll conclude there's something wrong with me, or I'm wired differently, or I must have bad genes, or my bad childhood like and caused me to be a certain way. And there's some reason why I'm struggling so bad, because no one wants to struggle. We all want to feel good, we all want to have a nice life. But what we also struggle with is not understanding why things are the way they are. So if we're ever in that situation, we'll almost grasp onto any theory rather than going, I don't know, because that's even worse. That's another problem. It's like, not only am I screwed, but it's a complete mystery as to why it is. So yeah, first thing, all of those things I would say are symptoms rather than, I'm not saying they're not problems in themselves, but to regard and try and treat and deal with them as the problem usually doesn't work. And again, take my word for this, look at yourself, look at your own life, look at your own experience, look at your observation of the world, of your friends, family, people is what I'm saying true? Does it play out? It looks that way to me. So the key is always what's kind of going on below the surface. And again, this thing that we refer to as the energetics is an understanding literally of how energy plays out and happens and occurs within your body, within your experience, within your mind, within your soul, your spirit, all of it, the totality of your experience of being a human being on planet Earth. That if you understand it, it's kind of like, I don't know, imagine at some point when you're growing up, somebody taught you that like the hot tap, or the red button on the tap was cold and the blue button was hot. And then for ages, you just went to the blue tap thinking it was hot and the red tap thinking it's cold. And you went to the red tap, you thought it was going to be cold, and you kept on getting burnt and burnt and burnt. And you were just completely like, this is a mystery. I don't know what's happening. Now, if someone then sat you down and said, hey, actually, the red is hot and the blue is cold. Now, sure, you might like accidentally forget one day, but as soon as you have that kind of correct understanding of how it works, you're just going to the blue tap for hot and the red for cold. You're not going to be burning yourself so much. And there's ways that, again, because we have misunderstandings about our own experience, we can go around sort of metaphorically scolding ourselves in the world. We hit up against people and have a bad experience, or we try and, we're in a job and we have problems with our boss, and we're trying to run a business and we're not getting anywhere, whatever it is. So how would somebody know that they maybe had some misunderstanding, or maybe they just missed a few classes? Like, I don't think many people get this as a matter of course in life. How would someone know? They'd probably be struggling or suffering with something. They may have been struggling or suffering with it for quite a long time. They may have had different things. If anyone's listening and they're in that boat, my heart goes out to you. But yeah, I would offer that there is something that can help. Coming to a better understanding of this stuff will really help. It's really helped me. I know it's really helping you, Charli, as well.
It is. I'd love to know, just quickly.
Sure.
How has it helped you?
Oh, Oh God, I mean, in a way, how hasn't it? I mean, like you know, as I said at the top of the call, like I've been sort of in and around what you could call the personal development space for ages. So, the truth, I have been making and have made like a load of really cool improvements in my life. I've been doing like pretty well for quite a while, like in terms of, the external markers of success by most people's estimation. What I would say is that as I've sort of integrated this stuff into, it's not even integrating into who I am or what I do. It is almost as automatic. It's like, if you know the cold tap is blue and the red tap is hot, you're just not going to get yourself burnt. So I would say, I was fortunate enough to have achieved some level of success. This has made it a whole lot easier. In the old world, there was still to some degree a thing of like I'll be successful to the extent that I do the right things. I've got the right plan and I execute it well. And I've always liked working hard. I don't mind working hard, but the harder I work, the better I'll do and do it. What I really see now is that truth is conveyed and contained energetically. So it's a lot less effort. Because if you're in touch with the essence of who you really are, and who you really are is not contaminated with a load of noise and nonsense, that essence, there's, stop counting a while back, but 8 billion people on the planet, 7 billion, everyone is similar and as unique as, your fingerprints or your eye prints or whatever. So there's some ways that we're all the same. There's some ways that we're individual and we're unique, but that essence within everyone, that kind of unique expression of who you are and who you want to be in the world, once that's kind of cleaned up and is just free to kind of come out and play and shine and just rock away, that's just a recipe for a really nice, enjoyable, easy life, doing whatever you want to do. And again, what you want to do will, what I want to do will be some ways similar, in some ways different to what you want to do, in some ways as similar as different to anyone else who might be listening to this. But yeah, what it's done for me is it's kind of given me almost like the ultimate diagnostic. So in any given moment, I can check in, I am where I am, I feel how I feel, things are going however they're going, and within very short order, I can sort of put my finger on it and go, okay, it's not a mystery anymore. I know why that's happening, or I know why that's not happening. And depending on, you plug it in and you do the readings and it comes out. And depending on what comes out, you just like, yeah, well, I know what to do then. Life just becomes a bunch easier.
So that would again probably take courage, I guess, to take responsibility for, if you're doing a diagnostic on yourself, or any of us, if we're sort of listening to this and thinking, yeah, I've got some struggles. My experience in my own self was that I didn't realize how wedded I was to some of my struggles, and didn't, I guess, fully trust myself. So how, when we're sort of articulating that in the principles world, they'd call that kind of wisdom. In this, it's very similar. It's a deeper knowing. It's that trusting yourself. But many people don't. Why do you think that is?
Oh, I mean, if I was just going to go straight for the jugular,
Please do.
the word I'd probably use is self-esteem. Like, we're all born into the world, and then we sort of, grow up and we have a family, be it a big one or a small one or whatever. And we have, sort of parenting and parenting influences, and then, our caregivers and all of that. And if we're lucky enough to be kind of brought into the world and nurtured in a way that has us feel whole, complete, strong, competent, capable. You know, we'll move through kind of childhood, adolescence into adulthood, and then we'll be faced with a new situation, and all of our kind of previous reference experiences will have us go, if I approach this the right way, if I do the right things, there's probably a good chance that it's going to go well. Now, if somebody doesn't have positive reference experiences, they could be in the same situation, but they'll be thinking, I'm probably going to fail. What's the point? You know, even if I try my best, I'll still fall short, yada, yada, yada. You know, the brass ring will get knocked out of my hands. So yeah, depending on your previous life experiences, you will be wherever you are today vis-a-vis that question. Now, that's the, well, it might be bad news or good news, depending what's happened. What I would say is I am becoming less and less certain that there are many limits to anyone's potential from this point forward. Like, I've seen people talk about this, get it very, very quickly and go in a completely different direction very, very quickly. And for some people, maybe it's more of a process, and that's fine too. But yeah, there may be people who, you know, are hearing something in this, but are like, you know, will it work for me? And what do I do? And I've tried 50,000 things times before, hasn't worked. You know, is this going to be different? And yeah, it can involve, or at least in that moment, it can look like a kind of leap of courage or a leap of faith to be willing to give up the certainty of the known, from which we can often get a high degree of safety and security, even if what we know, and even if that safety and security is oriented around things that are negative. So, you know, I guess kind of example down on this side would be like, you know, somebody who self-harms, for example. You know, they are experiencing pain, and some of it is pain that they're inflicting on themselves. You know, if they've learned that pain is inevitable, they may think, well, may as well be pain I'm in control of as pain that I'm not in control of. So yeah, the willingness to forego certain habits of behavior, certain habit patterns of mind, the willingness, got the ultimate one, probably the willingness to give up certain emotions. That's, I think, really at the heart of a lot of this. You know, we have the ability to literally bully and chastise and castigate ourselves with our own emotions. Yeah, the willingness to forego the known in favor of something different is a huge one. Yeah, it can involve courage. It can involve a, you know, what, again, depending on someone's appetite or their current level, like what could feel like a massive level of courage. Where people change, in my experience, is twofold. So number one would be, and it's usually a combination of these. So number one would be if they hear something in this that on some level like resonates as true. And this is really interesting because I've had this a bunch. So for me, it will be like I'm talking to somebody and they'll say something to me, and in my like inside, I'll want to like fight back or argue or deny or, you know, whatever, reject it. But there's this tiny little thing in me that's like, can I swear on this thing? I won't swear.
Yes, you can. Yes,
I was gonna. I won't.
You can though. You can.
Like, you know, you swear. You know, I hate you, but you're right. Like, you know, it's that deeper knowing. And again, it's the sort of, it's the conditioning versus the deeper wisdom. Now, no matter how far down in the swamp you are, that wisdom is still there, I promise you. So like your boiler, the pilot lights on, even if it's just a little thing at the back. So yeah, the two things that often help people get leverage, number one would be hearing something that's undeniably true. Like, I don't care how much you hate me right now, but if you know that what I'm saying is true, I'd say be willing to like use that as like your lighthouse. Let that give you hope. And number two, and these often go hand in hand, is if somebody who, it can go both ways. So sometimes people have been struggling or suffering for a long time, and they get into a very kind of negative victim-y cycle with it. Like literally almost like they're wedded to their own, they're married to their own pain and suffering and struggle. But even in that place, sometimes somebody can just get to a point where they're like, you know what, I've had enough. Like, I've had enough already, you know, whatever, like, let's give it a go. Like, you know, I know how it works if I do it that way. I've got like 96 examples of, you know, being reactive, or, you know, being a victim, or entertaining my own nonsense, or taking shit from other people, whatever it might be. Enough already, done with that, right, I'm here, what you got, let's try something new. So yeah, somewhere in those two things, again, I know from my own experience, the courage can be found to be willing to engage, entertain, yeah, consider the possibility that there's something in here that could be useful.
So all those problems that all of those, I guess, consequences of not understanding this look like money issues, debt, spending, overspending, overeating, overdrinking, whatever, like all of those, the overs. What would you say that is a consequence of that particular thing? Because those are the things that I see the most and have been my experience of life.
So what they are consequences of, I would say they are consequences of a misunderstanding and a misuse of energy, or a misunderstanding and a misuse of creative potential. So think of it like, I don't know, if you give me some water, like if you give me like a big bag of water, and I put that water in a bucket and I leave it for a year. At the end of that year, that water is going to be stagnant and horrible. If I take that water and I spray it on my garden, it will help the flowers grow. If I take that water and I drink it, it will nourish and sustain me. If I take that water and put it in a nice ornament, I could make a little water feature in my, you know, pot on my landing, whatever it might be. This isn't about water, but point being, there's these substances that we all kind of work with in this life. In this one, we're talking about energy, that if we use them in a certain way or utilize them in a certain way, will tend to lead us in a certain direction. There's these same energies that if we do other things with them, sometimes other things might be doing no thing with them, then like the water, they will kind of stagnate, and like stagnant water smells and it's not drinkable and and it grows weird stuff on it, and so there's all these consequences of using this substance in a certain way. We're all living beings, we're all animated with the life force, we all have energy within us. If we are misusing our vital force, there can be a whole load of negative consequences in terms of how that will manifest in our life. Some of the ones we've mentioned being, you know, chief amongst them for a lot of people. So yeah, this is about the use or misuse of energy, the understanding of energy, the holding of energy, the directing of energy, you know, knowing when to hold, knowing when to fold, you know, however, whatever it might be, whatever the action is in the physical. Yeah, the things we're talking about, the kind of the addictions, the negative patterns, the struggles, the frustrations, on a kind of root level, they are all sort of end game manifestations of a misunderstanding and a misuse of creative potential. Again, if you look out in the world, what you'll tend to see, I mean, if we talk just about addictions for a minute, addictions will tend to play out in men and women slightly differently, often. There's similarities but differences. But in a general sense, they are end results. I mean, I would also lump within that sort of lesser things, so things like victimhood, things like criticizing, things like complaining, things like moaning, things like gossiping, things that most people would consider like sort of, more acceptable human behaviors, but not generally kind of good, useful, conducive to our individual and the greater good. All of this, the more you clean up your understanding, the more you're going to find you just don't habitually go there, because you see a clear choice. And as you start to do this, you'll start to get the results that you'll get from going in a different direction. And then that will create a role the other way. So, it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy one way or the other. Just depends on which direction you're heading. The expression they say, like, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's from the Bible. Like, I'm not sort of using it in a religious sense. Like, for anyone who's sort of Christian or an adherent to a faith, full respect. I'm using it in the more kind of colloquial sense. Like, yeah, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. That's exactly what that means to me. Like, if you understand this, you will tend to move in a certain direction that will have a momentum in a positive direction. If you don't, you can get on a bad loop or a bad cycle or a bad roll, and then you wake up 10 years later and you've got problems, or your life's not where you want it to be, or whatever. It's not a mystery. It's not a mystery. And for anyone listening to this who doesn't feel like they're in a good place, you can totally pull it around. Like, again, I'm becoming less and less convinced that there's any such thing as like a hopeless case or somebody who's past help. There's absolutely such a thing as someone who's convinced that they are, but again, that's just a perception based on an experience. That's not a fundamental reality.
That was my belief until you came into my world. So yes, we mentioned secrecy, and you said, I'm going to put that over there. What do you have to say about that?
Well, it's funny, I sort of almost touched on it a minute ago when I said there's sort of like, big life things that can be like negative consequences.
Yeah.
And then there's sort of kind of more common and garden stuff. So I would sort of look at secrecy in this bracket, and secrecy to me is, so the first thing, if we're talking like relationally, like, man and a woman, intimate relationship, or, man, woman, or whatever your thing is, like, I would make a distinction between secret and private. So I think privacy is one thing. Secrecy, we're talking about, that's kind of something different. So secrecy to me is usually, again, it's a result. It's like, it's a person who either doesn't have the ability to know themselves and articulate themselves and their world and their reality well or effectively enough to get their needs met, or it's somebody who doesn't feel like they have an outlet, a receptive listening ear, somebody who will listen, care, understand. They'll be in a place where they're like, I should tell this person, but I either don't feel able to, or I can't express myself, or I'm worried what they'll do if I do tell them, blah, 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 blah. So the idea of a secret is like, there's 101 things that I don't know about you, Charli. There's 101 things you don't know about me. But they're not secrets because we don't have the relationship where you'd necessarily expect that, we'd shared that stuff. So secrets are usually, the context or the connotation is usually a relationship where you either want to be able to relate to someone on a certain level, or you feel like you should, but you either feel like you can't, or you feel like you don't want to. And then if you go down one more level, there's like, again, pardon my French, but if you take secrets down to the absolute kind of personal level, there's literally like the secrets we keep from ourselves. Yeah. So that would be the ways that we kind of lie to ourselves, or tell ourselves stories, or explain or justify or rationalize to ourselves why we're doing something that we, air quotes, shouldn't be doing. Again, I'm not judging, but that's often the perception. And again, that's a manifestation of the same thing, in the same way that secrets within a relationship would be, I don't feel able to express myself. Like, I literally don't have the words, or I can't figure out my own reality enough to be able to put it into a form. Or I don't want to do, I could do that, but I don't want to because I'm afraid of how you'll respond. exactly the same operates within us as well. So if we do not know ourselves, if we do not understand ourselves, we can literally be like chaotic and I just don't know what's going on in my own head. The same one is true. Like if we know the truth, but we're afraid if we admit the truth to ourselves that we will be forced to judge ourselves or label or beat ourselves up or whatever. Again, we can almost be sort of secretive with ourselves. You know, other words you might use are kind of avoidance or denial. I don't want to kind of put anything on anyone or like sound like I'm being judgmental. You know, it's all love. But again, usually a person will have recourse to that because they don't feel like they have a better option. Again, my personal experience, the more that I've done what I needed to do to understand myself and to understand how I work, to understand what's going on for me in every moment, the more I have availability to relate to myself, the more I can have a healthy relationship to myself, the more I'm able to do it with myself, the more I'm able to do that with other people. So you sort of break the cycle by, yeah, coming back to this kind of core energetic understanding, which again, we've touched on a little bit, but we haven't, still a lot of questions, I'm sure. But
well, there is, but we're running out of time, which is, I think this is probably be like a 2-hour one.
Well, I'll leave that up to you. I mean, we can either carry on and you can release it in 2 parts, or we can.
I have got another. I've got
back.
another call, so if you're up for doing a second part, then I'd have to create another time.
Sure.
Yeah, there's so much there. There's so much good stuff. I think actually it might be, if you're up for doing a part 2, then giving people an opportunity to just listen to this so that it sinks in, because for a lot of people, what we're articulating, what you're articulating, will be something that people will never have heard about before, and have been potentially sort of holding their own struggles internally inside, you know, secretly or privately, looking outside for the answers in the world of popular psychology. So to sort of end what we've been talking about today, how would you summarize to someone who is listening, who has heard something, but isn't quite sure what they've heard?
Well, I would say be willing to stay with that knowing, knowing that there is a lot more available, but not being willing to not have that just yet. Like not because I'm not like I'm holding out on you or anything, but just, you know, we've got as far as we have today. But yeah, like if you've been listening to this and something inside you has kind of landed or resonated, and that could be like yeah, there's some, you know, something in that, like a little itch you want to scratch. Also, for some people, it can be that the truth can sometimes be quite confronting or quite grating. So some people will be like, in their mind or in the heart, they'll be like, yeah, that's stupid. Anyway, fuck off. Like, get the hell away from me. And some people will be kind of riled or rattled, like, you know, because the ego has all these kind of defense mechanisms and way that it tries to stay safe and tries to stay sort of safe and comfortable in the known. So I'm less bothered about sort of subjectively what someone's response is, but to sort of speak to the first group for a minute, you know, the people who are like, yeah, there's something in there. I would say for now, just be willing to stay with that and stay with it on 2 levels. Level number 1 being that kind of content wise, yeah, you may have come across something that could be really useful for you, and it could be useful for you to kind of learn more and explore and whatever else. But number 2, and this for me is the really, really, really important one, it's your connection to that knowing within you. And that today in this moment, you might have had a felt experience connection to your own knowing about what Charli and I have been talking about today. But tomorrow it could be something else. Tomorrow it could be your playing with your kids and you have an insight about something to do with one of your kids, or it could be you're talking to your husband or partner or wife or girlfriend, whatever, thinking about them, and you have an insight about that. Or it could be an insight to do with your business, or it could be to do with your career, it could be to do with your parents, it could be to do with your community, it could be to do with the world, politics. God, there's enough going on there at the moment. Literally anything. But the commonality in all of those things is that there's something inside of you that has the ability to steer and guide you towards truth.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people, particularly people who've had bad past experiences, who are maybe insecure, they'll be like, shit, but I thought I had a knowing about this and and I made a decision, it ended up going wrong. Cool, it's all good as well. We'll work with that. Like, be with this and see if you can tell whether there's something in this that feels different to that. Because again, this all works by contrast. But as a closing thought, Charli, I'd say every human being on this planet has a thing that I would call their knowing, not a belief, not a theory, not a I wonder, not I wish, like a knowing, like an ability, a capacity within them that's kind of pre-installed, preloaded to know. And that a huge part of this process, a huge part of this work is getting more in touch with that, building a relationship to that, and then living from that place. And like any relationship, the more that you kind of nurture it, the more it grows, the more connected you become. And then that over time can become the thing that just leads and guides your life. And that for me has been a very, very different way to live.
Thank you. Me too. And thank you so much for answering my very few questions in the end.
I'm sure there's more.
There is. There's look, there's a whole page though.
Well, tell you what, put this out there. Put it out, see how it lands. Like, if people are hearing something, if they want us to come back and do it again, you know. And I know you've got like pages of questions, but you know, if anyone listening has questions, like I'd love for our next conversation, if we have one, you know, as well as whatever you wanted to ask and whatever I think to bring to, you know, audience participation. Like, if people have questions, if they've heard me say something, I heard you say something, they're like, oh, you said this, what did you mean by that? Or I heard you say this, but what about over here? Yeah, I'd love for the folks listening to chip in as well.
Cool. I will definitely invite that from my community. Thank you so much, Jonny, for coming and doing this podcast with me. I really appreciate it, and you, and I will talk to you very soon.
I hope so. Take care. Thanks, Charli.
Bye.
Bye.